16 years of brotherhood between Sonny West and Elvis Presley ended with a phone call in July 1976. It was not from Elvis himself. It was from Elvis's father, Vernon. A few weeks of severance pay, and then the line went dead. Sonny never spoke directly to the king again. But what Sonny did next, and what he revealed in his final years before dying in 2017, completely reframes everything we thought we knew about Elvis's last days alive. The story everybody remembers is simple. Fired bodyguard writes a tell-all book, betrays Elvis, and cashes in on the king's secrets. That version fits on a tabloid headline, and it stuck for 40 years. But the real story behind Sonny West in that book is so much more complicated, so much more painful, that once you hear it, you'll never look at Elvis's final chapter the same way. It started in Memphis in 1958. Sonny met Elvis through his cousin, Red West. And even though Elvis was already the biggest name in music by then, Sonny said the fame was not what hit him. It was how genuinely warm the guy was. Years later, he would call Elvis the most fantastic human being he had ever met, not as a former employee giving a rehearsed answer, as a friend remembering someone he loved. By 1960, Sonny was working full-time inside Elvis's world. He stood 6 feet tall, built like a linebacker, and he handled security on Elvis's concert tours across America. He would roll into cities a day ahead of the entourage, coordinating with local police, locking down hotels, and making sure nobody got close enough to cause problems. He threw punches alongside Elvis on Hollywood film sets while doing stunt work. He was there for the late-night talks at Graceland, the spontaneous road trips, the quiet moments when Elvis stopped being an icon and just became a guy sitting around with his friends. They called themselves the Memphis Mafia. Black mohair suits, dark sunglasses, twin black limousines pulling up to hotel entrances. A fan outside the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas saw them rolling in and shouted, "Who are they, the Mafia?" It stuck. But the name undersold what they actually were to each other. These were not just employees on a payroll, they were family. And if you need proof of that, look at December 1970. Sonny married actress Judy Jordan, and Elvis Presley stood as his best man. Priscilla Presley served as matron of honor. The biggest entertainer on earth cleared his schedule to stand up at his bodyguard's wedding. That tells you everything about the depth of this friendship. 3 weeks after that wedding, Sonny stood beside Elvis and Jerry Schilling in the White House when Elvis met President Richard Nixon. That famous photograph of Elvis shaking President Nixon's hand in the Oval Office. Sonny was right there in the room. For 16 years, this was his life. Traveling the world with Elvis, protecting him from crowds of screaming fans, watching him navigate pressures that would have crushed anybody else. But something started shifting in the mid-1970s. Something dark crept into the rooms at Graceland, and Sonny could not look away from it. The prescription medication started as management tools. Pills to sleep after the adrenaline of a concert at the Las Vegas Hilton. Pills to wake up for an early morning flight. Pills to handle the chronic pain that touring put on Elvis's body. But the bottles multiplied. The dosages climbed. And the Elvis that Sonny had known for over a decade started disappearing behind a pharmaceutical fog. Sonny watched it happen in real time. The warm, shy, generous guy from Memphis was becoming someone else. His personality shifted. His judgment got erratic. The doctors around him kept writing prescriptions because telling Elvis Presley no meant losing access to the most lucrative patient in entertainment. Nobody in that orbit wanted to risk their position by speaking up. Nobody except Sonny, his cousin Red, and another bodyguard named Dave Hebler. These three did something almost nobody in Elvis's world had the nerve to do. They confronted him directly about the pills. They pushed back. They tried getting him in front of physicians who would actually treat him instead of just keeping him sedated and compliant. In an environment where every single person around Elvis was incentivized to say yes, these three kept saying no. And that is probably why Vernon Presley called them in July 1976 to say their services were no longer needed. The official reason was budget cuts. Vernon said they needed to trim expenses. Nothing personal. Here is a few weeks' pay. Goodbye. 16 years of loyalty compressed into a phone conversation with Elvis's father, while Elvis himself stayed silent in another room at Graceland. Sonny asked to speak with Elvis directly. Red asked too. They wanted to hear it from him. They wanted to understand what had changed, or at least get a real goodbye from the man they had considered a brother. The requests were denied. Elvis would not take their calls. He would not open the gates at Graceland. 16 years of trust, and the door just closed. The theories about the real reason pile up depending on who tells the story. Some point to the drug confrontations, arguing Elvis could not stand being challenged by the only people brave enough to confront him. Others mention lawsuits from fans roughed up by the bodyguards' aggressive security tactics on tour. Maybe Vernon really was cutting costs. But whatever combination of reasons put them on the outside, the result was devastating. Sonny lost his best friend, his income, and his identity in a single afternoon. If you are finding this breakdown interesting, hit subscribe. We cover stories like this every week, the ones that go deeper than the headlines. Now the desperation set in. Sonny could not reach Elvis by phone. He could not get past the gates at Graceland. He could not send a message through any of the remaining Memphis Mafia members still on the payroll. And every week that passed, he watched from the outside as Elvis's concert performances grew sloppier, as tabloid photos showed more weight gain, as whispered reports from inside the circle grew darker. That's when the idea took shape. If they could not reach Elvis privately, maybe they could reach him publicly, shock him into seeing what the drugs were doing. Elvis responded to shock value, Sonny explained later. He was in complete denial about the pills, and nobody left in his orbit had the courage to challenge that denial. So Sonny, Red, and Dave Hebler decided to write a book. A tabloid publisher called World News Group jumped on the project immediately. They assigned a journalist named Steve Dunleavy to work with the three bodyguards. And almost from day one, the collaboration went sideways. Within the first week, a private detective named John O'Grady showed up at Sonny's door representing Elvis. The message was blunt. Name your price. Whatever dollar amount makes this book go away, Elvis will pay it. Sonny turned the offer down flat. Taking a payoff would have made him exactly like every other enabler in Elvis's life. The yes men, the prescription-happy doctors, the entourage members who watched their friend deteriorate because confrontation meant losing their paychecks. So they kept writing. But Steve Dunleavy was a tabloid man through and through. He understood scandal, sensation, checkout stand headlines that made people gasp. The bodyguards wanted the book to read like an intervention. Dunleavy wanted it to read like an expose, and slowly, page by page, the tone shifted away from what Sonny had intended. The core facts stayed accurate. Everything described in those pages really happened. But Dunleavy stripped out the context, the tenderness, the genuine concern for a friend in trouble. What remained read like betrayal dressed up as journalism. Elvis: What Happened hit shelves in July 1977. Advance copies had already leaked, and the reaction was immediate. Elvis fans across America were furious. Death threats arrived at Sonny's home in Memphis. Strangers called him Judas at gas stations and grocery stores. The narrative was clean and simple, and wrong. People saw 3 fired employees getting revenge through a tell-all. Traitors selling out the king for royalty checks. Sonny tried explaining in every interview that would have him. He tried making people understand this was a last resort, an act of love disguised as a book deal. But nuance does not survive a tabloid news cycle. The label stuck. The worst part was that Elvis knew the book existed. He knew what was in it. And instead of recognizing the desperate plea behind the pages, he read it as the ultimate knife in the back. The people he had trusted with his life were now sharing his worst moments with the entire world. Then August 16th arrived. The news broke while Sonny was doing press interviews for the book at a television studio. Elvis Aaron Presley was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor at Graceland. He was dead at age 42. The prescription drug problem they had spent a year trying to warn the public about had done exactly what they feared it would do. Everything stopped. The press tour, the explanations, The arguments about motives, none of it mattered anymore. Sonny broke down sobbing during a television interview the day after Elvis died. Raw, uncontrollable grief from a man who had just lost the closest friend he had ever had. This was not someone celebrating vindication. This was not an author watching his predictions come true. This was a man who would have traded every copy of that book for one more conversation with Elvis at Graceland. Elvis. What Happened sold over 3 million copies after his death. The timing was grotesque. Their warning had been published 2 weeks before the exact scenario they had described actually killed him. The book that was supposed to save Elvis became his obituary. For the next 3 decades, Sonny carried that weight through every room he entered. Elvis fans blamed him everywhere he went. They called him a traitor at autograph signings. They sent death threats through the mail. They accused him of hastening Elvis's death by adding public humiliation to an already fragile man's burden. He watched Elvis's legend grow from a distance. He watched Graceland become a pilgrimage site. He watched new generations discover the music without ever knowing about the Memphis Mafia or the real story behind that inner circle. When documentaries mentioned Sonny at all, it was always in connection with the book. One decision overshadowed 16 years of loyalty. By the early 2000s, Sonny was approaching 70. Something in his perspective shifted. He started thinking less about Elvis's legacy and more about his own. What would people actually remember about Sonny West when he was gone, the book, or the friendship? In 2007, he published a second book from his home in Hendersonville, Tennessee. Elvis Still Taking Care of Business. No tabloid writers this time, no sensationalism, just the memories that made up 16 years of brotherhood. Late-night gospel sessions at the piano inside Graceland. The Christmas when Elvis rented out an entire movie theater for the guys. The time Elvis walked into a car dealership and bought Cadillacs for complete strangers just because he could. The human moments that Steve Dunleavy's prose had buried. He started performing a one-man show called Memories of Elvis in small theaters. Standing on stage alone, telling stories about the Elvis nobody got to see. The generous one, the funny one, the guy who cared so deeply about the people around him that it came through in 1,000 small gestures. Audiences walked in skeptical and walked out, understanding that this man was not a villain. He was a friend who had been trapped in an impossible situation with no clean exit. But redemption came with its own cost. In 2012, doctors diagnosed Sonny with stage 4 cancer. It started in his tonsils, then spread to his lungs. His wife Judy fought breast cancer at the same time. Their medical bills at the hospital in Tennessee stacked higher every month as insurance covered less and less. The man who had traveled the world in twin black limousines with Elvis Presley found himself selling memorabilia to pay for chemotherapy. Photographs, clothing, personal gifts. Elvis had given him over 16 years. Each item that left his hands was another piece of that friendship converted into a medical bill. He faced foreclosure on his home. In late 2016, hospitalized and fading, Sonny gave a final interview to Inside Edition from his hospital bed. His voice was thin. His body was failing. He talked about not wanting to leave Judy with nothing after he was gone. The contrast was staggering. The glamour of the Memphis Mafia years, compared to dying in a hospital room and selling off memories to survive. Sonny West died on May 24, 2017, 2 months before his 79th birthday. Red West followed him less than 8 weeks later. The original Memphis Mafia cousins were gone within weeks of each other. An entire era ended quietly in hospital rooms far from the spotlights at the Las Vegas Hilton, where it had all seemed so permanent. Sonny's story reveals something uncomfortable about fame and the people who orbit it. The Memphis Mafia members built their entire adult identities around proximity to one extraordinary person. When that proximity ended, the value evaporated. They were left carrying memories that did not pay medical bills and stories that lost currency as the audiences who cared about them aged out. Some Elvis fans eventually forgave Sonny. They understood that loving someone sometimes means doing ugly, desperate things to keep them alive. others never did. They still call him a traitor on internet forums and comment sections decades later. The truth sits somewhere between those two camps. Sonny West was not the villain the tabloids created, and he was not the selfless hero he sometimes cast himself as in later years. He was a man who loved his friend, ran out of options, and made a choice that echoed for 40 years. He tried to correct the record with a second book and a one-man show, and every interview that would have him. Whether any of it worked depends entirely on whether the person listening actually wanted to hear it. He left behind two very different books telling two very different halves of the same story. Together, they paint something more honest than either one manages alone. A picture of what it looks like when love and betrayal occupy the same room. When good intentions build roads to places nobody wanted to reach. When the right thing and the wrong thing look identical until years later, and sometimes not even then. Sonny West died believing he had tried to save his friend's life. Elvis died believing his friend had stabbed him in the back. Both of them were right. And that might be the most painful part of this whole story. Sometimes there is no version of events where everybody gets to be okay. If this story hit you differently than you expected, the video on screen right now goes even deeper into the Memphis Mafia and what really happened inside Graceland during those final years. I'll see you in that one.